The humid Seoul air wrapped around Amara the moment she stepped out of the international terminal, a stark contrast to the familiar warmth of Lagos. Sitting in the back of the sleek car, taking her to the Grand Hyatt, she checked her schedule for the International Entrepreneurship Summit, 2 weeks. She repeated the timeline like a mantra in her head. She was only here for 14 days to secure a distribution deal for her natural skincare brand. And then she would be back, on a plane, safely away from the shadows of her past. She looked down at Ethan, who was pressed against the window, his eyes wide with wonder at the towering glass skyscrapers. Amara drew a shaky breath, smoothing down her tailored blazer. She had built a life out of nothing, and proven she could survive alone. Seoul could no longer hurt her. A few floors above the bustling lobby, the atmosphere was thick with corporate opulence. Ji-hoon stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne resting between his fingers. Around him, the laughter of South Korea's elite echoed off the gilded walls, but he remained entirely detached. To the board members trying to catch his eye, he was the untouchable, calculating face of the Kang conglomerate. But beneath the expensive suit, he was simply numb. For 7 years, his life had been a monotonous cycle of high-stakes negotiations and empty galas. He had stopped looking for joy the day Amara vanished, leaving behind an ache that time had failed to dull. Restless, Ji-hoon excused himself from a group of investors and walked out toward the grand mezzanine overlooking the main lobby. He needed air, away from the forced smiles of a world he despised. Then he heard it. A soft, melodic laugh carried upward by the lobby's acoustics, followed by a gentle maternal reprimand spoken in a warm, distinct Nigerian accent. Ji-hoon froze. His fingers tightened around his glass. It was a voice he had heard in his dreams every night for nearly a decade. Abandoning all corporate decorum, he rushed down the grand, sweeping staircase, his eyes desperately scanning the crowd until they locked onto her. It was Amara. She was more elegant than he remembered, her radiant dark skin glowing under the chandelier light. As if sensing the intensity of his gaze, Amara turned. Her breath hitched, and she froze mid-step, her heart stopping dead in her chest as her brown eyes met his wide, disbelieving dark ones. Time fractured between them, but neither of them could speak. Instead, Ethan pulled gently on Amara's hand, looking up from his mother to the towering, emotional stranger. With a child's fearless curiosity, his voice rang out clearly across the quiet marble floor. "Why are you staring at my mom?" The heavy oak door of Suite 802 had barely clicked shut behind Amara and Ethan, before a low, commanding knock reverberated through the quiet room. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Ji-hoon's immense corporate influence meant a VIP guest list and room assignment were minor obstacles. Hurriedly, she guided a yawning Ethan into the adjacent bedroom, kissing his forehead and murmuring for him to rest after the long flight. When she finally opened the main door, Ji-hoon stepped inside, shutting it firmly behind him. The cool, detached billionaire from the lobby was gone. In his place stood a man burning with a raw, agonizing intensity. For a long, suffocating moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a tight wire until Ji-hoon finally broke, his voice thick with a 7-year fracture. "Why, Amara?" The question tore from him, stripping away all his carefully cultivated corporate discipline. He stepped closer, his dark eyes searching her face with desperate, bleeding urgency. 7 years. Not a single text, not an explanation. You vanished into thin air and left me to a world that meant absolutely nothing without you. Did our love mean so little that you could just walk away and never look back? Amara swallowed, the bitter lump of truth rising in her throat. Seeing his pain tore at her heart, but the memory of his family's cruel, ruinous threats flashed vividly in her mind. She had to protect Ethan. Wrapping her arms tightly around herself like armor, she forced her voice to remain cold and steady. Our world was impossible, Ji-hoon. I did what I had to do for myself. I built a life, and I moved on. And the boy? Ji-hoon's voice dropped to a fierce, trembling whisper as he stepped even closer, cutting off her path of retreat. Don't lie to me, Amara. I saw him. I saw his face. I saw the dimple. He is 6 years old. The timeline matches perfectly. Tell me the truth. Is he my son? Amara's heart hammered violently against her ribs, but she held his gaze, channeling every ounce of her maternal resilience. He is my son, she lied, her voice unwavering despite the terror screaming inside her. Only mine. Ethan has nothing to do with you or the Kang family, Ji-hoon. I met someone else after I left Korea. He isn't yours. Ji-hoon stared at her, his jaw clenching as he fought the rising tide of disbelief and sorrow. He could see the defensive wall she had erected, but the biological pull he had felt in the lobby was too strong to ignore. You're lying, he whispered, his eyes dark with a dangerous mix of heartbreak and sheer determination. Amara stood her ground, her face a mask of absolute independence, silently praying he couldn't hear her heart breaking all over again. Ji-hoon did not believe a single word. The cold, logical side of his brain that ran an empire knew Amara was a master of self-preservation, but his heart had already recognized his own blood. He couldn't force her to speak, but he could let science do the talking. The very next morning, utilizing the absolute efficiency of his corporate network, Ji-hoon orchestrated a casual corporate family brunch in the hotel's private garden, ensuring his personal assistant's young son was there, with an array of interactive building blocks. When Ethan spotted the toys, his natural fearless curiosity did the rest. Ji-hoon watched from the shadows of the veranda as the two boys played, his chest tightening when Ethan laughed, flashing that undeniable dimple. The moment Ethan used a disposable plastic cup and a toy toothbrush provided in the children's activity pack, Ji-hoon's trusted assistant discreetly secured the items, rushing them directly to a premier, high-priority genetics lab in Seoul. Meanwhile, Amara was operating on pure adrenaline. The terrifying confrontation in her suite had triggered every survival instinct she possessed. She knew Ji-hoon's brilliant, calculating mind wouldn't rest, and she had no intention of waiting around for him to tear her carefully constructed world apart. Her 2-week timeline evaporated into a desperate 24-hour race against the clock. Amara aggressively pushed her international summit meetings forward, catching her distribution partners off guard with her sudden, intense urgency. Sitting in the high-rise boardrooms of Seoul, her dark skin radiant, but her eyes sharp with maternal panic, she negotiated with a fierce, breathless brilliance. She trimmed the fat from the contract, signed the skincare distribution deal with a major Korean retailer hours ahead of schedule, and immediately used her phone under the table to book the earliest premium flight back to Lagos. By late afternoon, Amara was back in Suite 802, throwing their clothes into suitcases with trembling hands. Every instinct screamed at her that the clock was ticking down to 0. Just a little longer, Ethan, she whispered, her voice a mix of fierce independence and raw terror as she zipped the bags shut. Mommy is taking us home. She looked out the window at the sprawling glass skyline of Seoul, praying with every fiber of her being that they could reach the airport and clear immigration before Ji-hoon's reach closed around them for good. The digital document on Ji-hoon's tablet decrypted with a soft chime. Standing in his high-rise office, he stared at the bold, undeniable numbers at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Ji-hoon's world tilted violently on its axis. The breath left his lungs as if he had taken a physical blow. For 7 years, he had lived as a ghost, in his own life, believing he was entirely alone, trapped in a cold dynasty. But the truth was staring back at him in black and white. He was a father. That beautiful, fearless little boy, with the bright eyes and the matching dimple, was his own flesh and blood. A profound, overwhelming wave of emotion crashed through him. But it wasn't anger at Amara's lie. It was an intense, fiercely protective love, mixed with an ache for all the years he had missed. Then his assistant's voice cut through his shock via the intercom. "Sir, Ms. Okafor and her son have just checked out of the hotel. They are heading to Incheon Airport." Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. Abandoning his afternoon board meetings, he raced to his car. At the international terminal, Amara pushed through the bustling crowds, clutching Ethan's small hand tightly in her own. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she neared the premium boarding gate. She could see the plane on the tarmac through the massive glass windows. Security check was clear. Passport control was done. Safety was only a few steps away. "Passengers for Flight 542 to Lagos. Priority boarding is now open," the gate agent announced. Amara drew a shaky, relieved breath and stepped forward, handing over their boarding passes. She had made it. She was escaping the trap. "Amara!" The deep, breathless voice sliced through the terminal noise, freezing her in her tracks. Amara turned, her face paling as she saw Ji-hoon pushing through the crowd. He wasn't flanked by lawyers or security. He was alone, his tie loosened, his eyes burning with an emotion so raw it made her chest ache. Amara instinctively stepped in front of Ethan, her eyes flashing with a desperate, hyper-independent defiance. "Ji-hoon, let us go. You can't stop us. I told you, he isn't—" "He is mine, Amara," Ji-hoon interrupted, his voice dropping to a fierce, trembling whisper as he stepped into her personal space. He didn't look angry. He looked completely undone. He held up the tablet, showing her the document, but his gaze immediately dropped to Ethan, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. Amara's defenses fractured, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Are you going to take him from me?" she whispered, terrified of the Kang family's immense power. "Is that what this is? Revenge?" "Never," Ji-hoon said, his voice thick with emotion as he gently reached out, his fingers stopping just short of touching her cheek. "I don't want revenge, Amara, and I will never take him from you. But I am not letting you run away again. I want to be a father. Please, let me be his dad." The hum of the airport terminal faded into a tense, suffocating silence inside the private lounge where Ji-hoon had guided them. Amara stood rigid, her arms wrapped protectively around Ethan, her eyes darting toward the glass doors as if calculating her chances of escape. She knew the power Ji-hoon wielded, and it terrified her. Ji-hoon saw the maternal panic in her eyes and gently held up his hands, stepping back to give her space. "My mother has ears everywhere, Amara," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "If she discovers Ethan through an airport scene or a public custody battle, she will use the entire weight of the Kang conglomerate to take him. I won't let that happen. Let me protect you both." He proposed a treaty, his tone shifting from a desperate lover to a fiercely protective strategist. Amara would cancel her immediate flight, and for the remaining 10 days of her business trip, she and Ethan would stay at his private, highly secure estate on the outskirts of Seoul. Away from the media, away from his family, and on neutral ground. Amara hesitated, her fierce independence screaming at her to reject his help, but looking at Ethan's exhausted face, she realized running now would only put a target on their backs. With a tight, cautious nod, she accepted. The transition to the estate opened a world Ji-hoon never thought he would experience. The cold, minimalist mansion suddenly filled with the warmth of a child's laughter. On their second evening, Ji-hoon sat flat on the hardwood floor of the sprawling living room, surrounded by hundreds of colorful Lego pieces he had rushed to the estate. Ethan sat cross-legged opposite him, his bright eyes scanning a complex instruction manual for a massive spaceship. "Like this, Mr. Ji-hoon?" Ethan asked, holding up two interlocking blocks, his left cheek denting with that familiar, charming dimple. Ji-hoon's chest swelled with a sudden overwhelming wave of emotion. "Exactly like that," he murmured, his voice thick as he gently guided Ethan's small hands to snap the pieces perfectly into place. "You have an engineer's eye, Ethan." "Mom says I get my smart brains from her," Ethan shot back with a cheeky, fearless grin. "But she's not very good at building spaceships. She prefers skincare bottles." Ji-hoon let out a genuine booming laugh, a sound that hadn't echoed through his home in 7 long years. Watching from the doorway, Amara leaned against the frame, her defensive wall fracturing just a little. Ji-hoon caught her eye, his gaze soft and full of quiet reverence. For the first time, he wasn't just a billionaire, managing an empire. He was a father, completely captivated by his son's wit, and secretly wishing these 10 days would never end. The quiet of midnight descended over the estate, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ambient glow of the courtyard lights spilling into the expansive kitchen. Unable to sleep, Amara stood by the marble island, wrapped in a silk robe, watching a kettle slowly come to a boil. The domestic peace of the past few days was intoxicating, and that was exactly what terrified her. "Still making chamomile when you can't sleep?" The deep, quiet voice made her jump. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway, his charcoal suit, jacket gone, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his forearms. He looked less like an untouchable billionaire and more like the man she had fallen in love with in a crowded university library 7 years ago. "Old habits," Amara murmured, turning her eyes back to the stove as he walked in. The air between them instantly grew heavy, thick with the unsaid truths of a lifetime. Ji-hoon stepped up to the island, leaning against it, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "We need to talk about the past, Amara. I can't keep pretending we are just two strangers sharing a house for Ethan's sake." Amara felt her defensive walls tightening. "There is nothing to talk about, Ji-hoon. Your family made it clear I didn't belong in your world. I left so you could have the empire you were born to lead. I assumed you married someone they chose for you, years ago." "I never married," Ji-hoon said softly, his voice cutting through her emotional armor. Amara looked up, her brown eyes widening in surprise. Ji-hoon took a step closer, his gaze burning with a raw, painful sincerity. "They tried. God knows they tried to force 100 corporate matches on me. But I refused. I spent the last 7 years fighting my mother, stripping away her leverage piece by piece, just so she could never dictate my life again. I didn't take the CEO chair for power, Amara. I took it so I could be strong enough to protect what mattered to me. But by the time I had the power, you were gone." The confession hung in the air, melting a piece of the icy reserve Amara had guarded for 7 years. The old, undeniable chemistry flared between them, a magnetic pull that made her breath hitch as Ji-hoon reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray curl away from her face. His touch was warm, familiar, and filled with a quiet reverence that made her heart ache. For a second, she wanted to lean into his hand, to believe that they could fix what had been broken. But then the phantom weight of her past trauma rushed back. She remembered the cold clinical threats from the Kang matriarch, the terrifying realization that powerful people could erase her with a single phone call. Her fear flared, pulling her back from the edge. Amara stepped away from his touch, her expression turning deliberately distant. "It's a beautiful sentiment, Ji-hoon," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. But an empire doesn't just disappear because you want it to. You might be stronger now, but so are the stakes. Good night. She grabbed her tea and hurried out of the kitchen, leaving him alone in the dim light, his hand still empty in the air. The illusion of safety shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. Amara was sitting in the estate's sunroom, reviewing the final distribution logistics for her skincare brand, when the heavy glass doors were pushed open without warning. Two stone-faced security guards stepped in, followed by a woman whose cold aristocratic elegance could only belong to one person, Madame Kang. Ji-hoon's mother moved with the absolute authority of a woman who ruled an empire from the shadows. Without a word, she tossed a sleek tablet onto the table in front of Amara. On the screen was a high-resolution, leaked photograph of Ethan playing in the estate garden, his face turned toward the camera, his left cheek bearing the undeniable Kang dimple. "He is a striking child," Madame Kang said, her voice dropping into the room like chips of ice. "He possesses the exact features of my son at that age. Did you truly believe you could hide a Kang heir in my own city?" Amara stood up slowly, her spine straightening as she channeled every ounce of her maternal resilience. She kept her voice steady, refusing to show the terror clawing at her throat. "Ethan is my son. We are leaving for Lagos in a few days. We have nothing to do with your family." Madame Kang let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You are incredibly naive if you think you are boarding that plane with my grandson. I have already mobilized our legal team. By tomorrow morning, a high-profile custody suit will be filed in the Seoul family court. We will tie you up in litigation for years. I will personally ensure your global skincare supply chains are severed, your distributors back out, and your business is completely ruined before the first hearing even begins." Amara's breath hitched. Her hyper-independence flared into panic as she realized her worst nightmare was unfolding. She was entirely outmatched by the sheer, devastating weight of the conglomerate. Madame Kang stepped closer, sliding a check from her designer handbag onto the table. The amount written on it was staggering, a sum that could fund Amara's brand globally for a lifetime. "Take the money, Amara, sign the custody relinquishment forms, leave the boy with us where he belongs, and fly back to Nigeria alone. If you fight me, you will lose your business, your reputation, and your son. You cannot win against an empire." The words echoed brutally through the sunroom, striking at the core of Amara's deepest trauma. Looking at the check, she felt the crushing weight of the past rushing back, demanding she run before everything she loved was utterly destroyed. Amara's hands shook as she threw Ethan's favorite stuffed animal into the suitcase. The cold, precise threats of Madame Kang echoed in her ears like a countdown timer. Her hyper-independence, born from years of relying only on herself, screamed that running was the only option left. She had to disappear before the legal trap snapped shut and tore her son away forever. "We have to go, Ethan. Hurry, sweetie," she whispered, her voice tight with panic as she zipped the bag. "Going somewhere," Amara gasped, turning to see Ji-hoon standing in the doorway of the bedroom. He had rushed back from the corporate headquarters, his face pale, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and heartbreak as he saw the packed bags. He stepped into the room, his voice a low, raw plea. "You're running again. After everything, you're still going to leave me behind." "Ji-hoon, your mother was here," Amara cried, the tears finally spilling over as her defenses completely shattered. "She has photos of Ethan. She is going to destroy my company, tie me up in courts, and take my son. I can't fight an empire, Ji-hoon. I have to protect him." Ji-hoon stepped forward, gently but firmly taking her trembling hands in his. His gaze was fierce, absolute, and entirely unbroken. "You are not fighting them alone, not this time. I told you I took that CEO chair. so I would be strong enough to protect what matters. Trust me, Amara. Just give me 1 hour. 1 hour later, the main auditorium of the Kang Investment headquarters was packed with a sea of flashing cameras and shouting journalists. A high-priority, live televised press conference had been called by the Billionaire CEO himself, blinding the board of directors and shocking the matriarch into silence. Ji-hoon stepped up to the podium, his posture commanding, the epitome of quiet luxury and unshakable power. He looked directly into the main television camera, speaking to the entire nation, and to the woman watching from the estate. I have called this conference to clear up rumors regarding my personal life and the future of this conglomerate. Ji-hoon's voice rang out, steady and clear. 7 years ago, I fell deeply in love with Amara Okafor. I never stopped loving her. Today, she is back in my life, along with our 6-year-old son, Ethan Kang. I am officially announcing Ethan as my sole, legitimate heir. A collective gasp rippled through the press room as cameras flashed frantically. Ji-hoon leaned closer to the microphone, his eyes burning with absolute determination. Any legal challenge to his custody and any corporate threat against his mother's business is a direct attack on me. I will gladly strip myself of my title and burn this entire empire to the ground before I allow anyone to harm my family. Watching the television screen from the estate, Amara pressed a hand to her mouth, her tears blurring the image of the man who had just risked everything he owned to stand by her side. For the first time in 7 years, the fear began to melt away. The broadcast ended, leaving the sunroom in a breathless, ringing silence. The live television feed cut to frantic news anchors, but Amara could only stare at the blank screen, her chest heaving as the crushing weight of a 7-year war finally lifted from her shoulders. Ji-hoon had done the unthinkable. By dragging the secret into the blinding light of the public eye, he had utterly neutralized his mother's shadow cabinet. A custody battle would now be corporate suicide for the Kang dynasty. When the heavy front doors of the estate opened a short while later, Amara was waiting in the foyer. Ji-hoon stepped inside, looking exhausted, but completely unburdened, having walked away from the podium and straight back to her. He stopped a few paces away, his dark eyes searching her face with a quiet, vulnerable anxiety. I meant every word, Amara, he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. The empire means nothing if I have to watch you run away through a terminal gate again. I don't want you to be independent because you're terrified of being hurt. I want to be your partner. Please give me a real chance to prove it. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man who had just offered up his entire world as a shield for hers. The deep-seated trauma, the hyper-independence that had forced her to shoulder every burden alone for 7 years, finally crumbled. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand gently over his heart. No more running, she whispered, a radiant, tearful smile breaking across her face. We fight together. A year later, the grand gardens of the estate were transformed into a breathtaking blend of 2 worlds. Viburnum flowers and white roses mingled with vibrant, rich Nigerian tie-dye textiles and the warm, rhythmic pulse of Afrobeat music. Amara stood under a floral canopy, stunning in a custom gown that paired modern sophistication with traditional elegance, her hand tightly clasped in Ji-hoon's. The ceremony was a masterpiece of quiet luxury, attended by international partners and a thoroughly defeated, politely smiling Madame Kang, who had no choice but to accept the public narrative. As the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, a cheering roar erupted from the guests. But before Ji-hoon could lean in to seal the vow, a small tug on his impeccably tailored suit trousers pulled their attention downward. Ethan, now 7, stood between them in a miniature tuxedo, his bright eyes darting from his mother's radiant face to his father's proud expression. With his characteristic, fearless curiosity, his loud voice cut cleanly through the applause, carrying across the entire garden. "Dad, why are you kissing Mum like you're about to cry again?" Ji-hoon let out a bright, booming laugh, his left cheek denting with the exact same dimple as his son's. Scooping Ethan up into his arms, he pulled Amara close against his chest. "Because, buddy," Ji-hoon whispered, looking into the eyes of the woman he had loved across 2 lifetimes. This time, they're happy tears.